What's up, Wizards? It is I, Dev, forever your boy. From Mtg, we like that magic stuff, and today just had some Captain D's. Don't know why I craved Captain D's, but I did. So I got a little brain food in me, and now I'm time to ready to do a little spoiler action for you. And good news, by the way, our air conditioning is fixed. As of like an hour ago, AC is fixed, but apparently it takes like 24 hours for your house to cool down after they fix your air conditioning. I didn't know that. The more you know. But anyway, let's get on to some spoilers, because Wizards released another like 7,200 cards or something like that today for Zendikar Rising, and it's going to take a while to get through all of them. The last three spoiler videos have all been like right around an hour, and we just can't do that every time. We can't do that every time. So let's go ahead and get on into it with the only card that we missed from yesterday. It came out like right after I uploaded the spoiler video. Fearless Fledgling. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 Griffin with landfall. And whenever a land ETBs UYC under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Fledgling and it gains flying till end of turn. I want to like this, especially in the Blue-White Flyers deck. Now, in Blue-White Flyers, you're probably going to hit that third land drop, and then you're probably going to hit that fourth land drop. Maybe, but after that, it might be a while before you play another land. So I'm not absolutely sure that that deck really wants this, although it could probably get it up to a 2 mana 4/4 somewhat easily, and at least a 2 mana 3/3 without too much trouble. So maybe this is a good 2-drop for those decks, and over the course of a game, obviously, it can get enormous. But I'm pretty sure that the ramp decks that play a bunch of cultivates and stuff that put extra lands into play all in one turn probably don't want this, though I may be wrong about that. This might be a really good creature, but I have my problems with it. Mostly it's a terrible top deck. If you drop it, late in the game, then it's probably not going to get too much bigger, all things considered. So I don't love this card, but I really, really, really want to, and I hope that it sees some amount of play. Let me put it that way. But anyway, let's move on already here to the stuff that we got to see this morning, like Kabria Takedown. We saw a lot of these tap lands today. Some of them are amazing, and some of them are just kind of meh, but I kind of like Takedown. This is 1 and a white for an instant, and I think instant speed really helps this card out a lot. It deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker. And of course, the other side of it is just a land that taps for white, but enters the battlefield tapped. I kind of like this a good bit. If you're playing against a deck that doesn't have too many targets for this, or if at the time you don't have too many creatures, this is at the very least a land drop. That's nice. I really highly value these cards quite a good bit. I've seen a lot of people basically putting all of these, lands, these flip lands down, but they just look amazing to me. And I'm not sure that a card like Takedown is going to see too much standard play, but just as a concept, as a design, I think that there's an awful lot of playability on almost all of these lands. Again, I'm not sure that Takedown is what we're looking for, but it might be that a tokens deck wants a piece like this to help hit its land drops, but also have a removal piece. It's entirely feasible that a deck might play like 2 copies of this card, because it's just relatively low opportunity cost for a tokens deck to play this as its removal piece. So, and that's kind of the theme with all of these, is how low the opportunity cost gets, especially on the Mythic ones that don't have to ETB tapped. I think those are just unbelievable. But we'll move on here to Kazel's Fury and Kazel's Cliffs. Now, Kazel's Cliffs is off screen right now, but you don't have to see it. It's just a land that taps for red and ETB's tapped. But Kazel's Fury is a fling for 1 mana more. It's just 2 and a red for an instant. Sacrifice a creature as an additional cost to cast it, and it deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. Literally flings text box for 1 mana more, but it comes stapled to a land, and that's really quite good, I think, especially considering a lot of the decks that use fling are very specialized or combo-y decks. Either that or Teamer Adventures, which will sometimes go and get, with Fae of Wishes, a fling out of its sideboard. It'll fling their Beanstalk Giant at you for like 12 damage. And you could just use Kazel's Fury instead, although you'd probably still end up using fling in a wish board because it costs less mana. But there might be occasions where, you need to wish for a land, so I'd say this could make it in that sideboard slot in Teamer Adventures, but I highly doubt. I think Fling is probably the better card for what that deck is trying to do. It wants the mana to, not only cast Granted, but also cast Fling in the same turn. And if you've already cast a Beanstalk Giant, you probably have enough mana to wish for, Kazel's Fury out of your board and cast it, because Beans cost 7, and casting Granted plus Kazel's Fury also costs 7 mana. But still, I think Fling might be the better card, all things considered, in that situation. But there's going to be plenty of other situations in decks that want to play Fling where this is just a better option. You know, it costs 1 more than Fling. It costs 50% more than Fling, but I think, you know, coming staple to a land is amazing and makes it ultimately more main deckable, which is really important. But moving on, we'll look at what I think is actually one of the best of these flip lands we've seen so far, and that's Hagribyte. Hagribyte is 2 and 2 black for an instant. If any opponent controls no basic land, this spell costs 1 less to cast. Destroy target creature. Pretty sweet. And obviously the other side, Hagribyte, is just a land that comes to play tapped and adds black. This is great. This is really good. Against control decks that don't really play too many creatures that you have, you know, you won't have any targets against like control decks, for instance. This is just a land drop, and that's great because if you're up against another control deck, you often want to win the resource war, and hitting your land drops is very important in that situation. So the card's just never going to be dead, and a removal spell like this would be dead some portion of the time, and you'll also hit the cost reduction on this every now and again, especially in the upcoming format where people are going to be fitting in these flip lands that interplay tapped or whatever. You're going to see a lot more of these, or a lot of them, in the upcoming format, I imagine. So, you know, that increases the chance that your opponent won't have any basic lands at any given time that you choose to cast this, and at that point it's just murder, and it's instant speed and everything. So I'm a big fan of this card. I think that it actually has some of the lowest opportunity costs to fit into your, you know, black-based control deck. Just some of the lowest opportunity costs we've seen of any card so far in this set. And I'm not saying it's like the most powerful thing we've seen so far, but I think it's in my top 5. I'm being serious, you know. It's a bad removal spell, but when you take I won't even say bad, you know. You take Murder, which doesn't usually see standard play, but you take a card like Murder and you stable it to a land, it gets much, much better because, again, it's almost free to put into your deck. So you might as well play the card, right? Card just looks amazing to me. I like removal. I've made no bones about that. I'm a huge fan of removal. I'm kind of a nerd for good removal spells, and even though this isn't technically a good removal spell, it's a really sweet piece of cardboard, so I like it. But moving on to Cragplate Baloth. I've seen a lot of people talking about this card today. 5 colorless and 2 green, 7 mana. For a 6/6 beast with kicker 2 and a green. It can't be countered, it has hexproof and haste, and if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So this is pretty good, but Carnage Tyrant it's not. Obviously, if it had Trample, it would be really good, I think, but, you know, it has hexproof and haste, so, and it can't be countered, so you're going to resolve it against the control opponent pretty much every time. It has haste, so it's going to immediately swing, and it has hexproof, so they can't, like, Heartless Act it the turn that you played or something. It's almost always going to get a swing in, so if it also had Trample, that would be a bit much. I think that would be a little pushed. As it seems, it's fair, you know. It is a little costly. 7 mana is a lot, not to mention 10 mana, but just the base cost of 7 mana is a bit steep, but there are definitely decks that could play this. There absolutely are decks that could play this card right now, and at the very least, it might be a decent sideboard option for like mono green against the control decks. You know, once you have your Great Hinge down, this doesn't really cost that much to cast. You know, it costs effectively 5 lands once you have a Great Hinge down. The Green Castle, you know, that definitely, yeah, Castle Garenbrig makes this slightly easier to cast, you know. Green is the color of ramp, too, and you've got a lot of really good ramp cards, so 7 mana in green just isn't what it seems. You know, we got people getting to Euro on turn 4, or, excuse me, Yugen on turn 4. So I really don't see this card being, you know, unrealistic to get to in this format, and it might be a really good sideboard piece, like really, really good sideboard piece. Or just main deckable one of or something, but I'm thinking more sideboard. But moving on, let's look at Shatter Skull Smashing. I posted about this on Twitter earlier because this kind of looks busted to me, but, you know, I've seen a lot of different dissenting opinions about not only these lands in general, but, you know, this card as well. Smashing, the spell half of it is X and 2 red for a sorcery. I don't like the sorcery speed, but still. Smashing deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, Smashing deals twice X damage divided as you choose among them instead. And then, of course, the Hammer Pass is just a land that taps for red, and it would enter the battlefield tapped, but if you bolt yourself and pay 3 life, then it comes into play untapped, which is very good. I just want to make myself pretty clear on this. These lands that have the opportunity to come into play untapped are, to me, incredible. they're very good. Again, opportunity cost is key here. And if you're playing red, there's just almost no reason to not play this card. I mean, you don't play 4 or anything, but, you know, I can definitely see a situation if you're playing 18 to 20 basic mountains anyway, then you just replace a basic mountain or 2 with a card like this, and there's no reason not to. You know, I know that aggro doesn't look like it wants a card like this too much, but if the game stalls or you get to turn 4 or 5 and you haven't drawn Torbrand or Embercleave yet, you can at least clear a path for your guys with a card like this. Note that it can hit multiple targets, just 2, but that's important. You know, in the mirror, it can sometimes kill a Robber of the Rich and a Fervent Champion. Against adventurers, this can kill an Edgewall Innkeeper and like a Brazen Borrower for just X equals 2, 4 mana. So it's not really that bad. And in a late game, it can just kill anything and just 2-for-1s. And, you know, maybe your red deck doesn't 2-for-1 very easily. So an effect like this looks really nice to have access to. Even if you only actually cast a spell like 1 out of every 6 games, it's probably, again, still worth it, because why not? You know, if you're an aggro deck, again, it doesn't look like you want this, but aggro really doesn't have much to lose from taking 3 damage unless they're in the mirror. And if you are in the mirror, maybe you side this out. But then again, in the mirror, again, you can pick off a Fervent Champion and a Robber of the Rich like really easily, you know, X equals 3. You're likely to get to 5 mana. Not incredibly likely, but, you know, you're like 60% likely to get to 5 mana. So it's entirely possible that, like, you know, you just see a 1 of this in place of a mountain. You know, not replacing any actual, you know, normal spells in the main deck, but just replacing a mountain it's probably worth it, y'all. I think that this might see play in tons of red decks, in tons of formats too, for what that's worth. You know, I think that a lot of these that come into play on tap could see legacy play. I'm not joking. I think that these are unbelievable. And by the way, I really like the art on this. You know, on one, the stone is suspended. On the other one, it's smashed into the ground. It took me a few times looking at the card to notice what was happening in the art. But still, I really think these cards are kind of unbelievable. And if you think they're not good, then I don't know what to tell you other than, like, opportunity cost is really, really, really important when building your deck. And I have no idea what the mana bases are going to look like as of yet, but they're almost certainly going to incorporate some number of these in, like, every color, you know. So I really like this spell. I mean, I don't love the spell half of it, honestly, but I love this card in general. I think it's probably going to end up seeing a ton of play. But there's so many different dissenting opinions. You know, you've got one half of the Magic community that thinks that these are unplayable, and you've got the other half that thinks that they're like a design mistake. They're so good. I lean more towards they're a design mistake, they're so good, but I still don't think that we'll end up seeing any of these get banned or just be unbelievable because, you know, they're still just a bad spell and a bad land stapled together. But I think that kind of consistency and extremely low opportunity cost for deck building is probably going to end up, you know, the end result is that we're going to have a bunch of these in decks in all kinds of different formats. But anyway, moving on to Inscription of Ruin. I don't like this one as much as the green Inscription, but it still looks like a decent card to me. This is 2 and a black for a sorcery with kicker 2 and 2 black. So 7 mana to kick it, 3 of that mana black. Choose 1. If the spell was kicked, choose any number. Target opponent discards 2 card, like a Mind Rot. Return target creature with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Or destroy target destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. Now if you kick this, it seems unbelievable, but it's kind of tough to kick. 7 mana is a good little bit, and we are seeing a lot of stuff that costs a lot of mana, and there's tons of ways to ramp in this format. But, you know, if you're even approaching 8 mana, you might as well just be Ugin. If you're not Ugin for that much mana, then you're probably not very good. But at the same time, you know, sometimes I will say this is never dead. You know, against aggro on turn 3, you can kill something. Against control, you can Mind Rot them. If you draw in the late game and you can't use the first 2 modes, you know, your opponent's out of cards, or you just wrath them or something like that. Then, you know, the second mode might come in handy if you've got something to utilize with that. So I think that it's one of those cards where if you can actually get all 3 modes to pop off, it's probably worth a lot, but 7 mana seems a bit steep, and I really don't like it for 3 mana. You know, the normal mode, it's a sorcery, and I think that hurts the card tremendously, but this is one of those that it might have just enough, you know, versatility in it that it ends up seeing some play. But moving on to Royal Eruption. This is 1 and a red for a sorcery. Ouch. Kicker 5. Royal Eruption deals 3 damage to any target. If the spell was kicked, it deals 5 damage instead. So that is kind of interesting to me. 7 mana is something you'll almost never get to in a burn deck, but just in case you do get to 7 mana in your burn deck, this is really interesting flood protection. And note that if you cast Iron Crag Feet, the 4 mana sorcery from Throne of Eldraine that gives you 7 red mana, but only allows you to cast 1 more spell that turn. then at the very least you can cast Royal Eruption and hit them for 5 in the face. That's a thing you can do with Ironcrag Feet. But despite the fact this is sorcery speed, I think it might actually end up seeing some play because it goes upstairs. And we just don't have a Lightning Strike. We don't have a Lightning Strike in this format. And I like Scorching Dragonfire, even like Flame Prophecy. I think it's a decent card, but if I have the opportunity to go upstairs, I'm just gonna play that card. I don't really care that it's a sorcery, especially in the red decks that want this. They don't have to play at instant speed most of the time anyway. So I don't think every deck's going to play Royal Eruption, but I'm going to play Royal Eruption in some decks. Good burn card in Standard, if nothing else. I don't think it sees play anywhere else, but you know, it goes to face, and that's super important because we haven't had a 3 damage, 2 mana spell that goes to face in what seems like a long time now. I miss you, Lightning Strike. I miss Lightning Strike so much that it makes me like Royal Eruption. But I think it could actually see some play, just for the ability to, you know, go dome, because that's important. But moving on, my favorite art in the set. This is a Tended Healer right here. This is how I feel every time I start to record a video with Ziggy, or every time I, like, you know, get on stream and Ziggy's there in the cat tree. This is my mood right here. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 2/3 core cleric. And whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white cat creature token. And you can pay 2 and a white to have another target cleric gain lifelink until end of turn. Sucks that you can't just give it lifelink. Right? It should be able to give itself lifelink. But all in all, I think this is like a really fun budget card. But I don't think it goes into the life gain decks. I don't know that they want something like this at 4 mana, because 4 mana is so much. Especially for stats like this bad. 4 mana is a bit steep. Let's be honest. And it, you know, it could play in different decks. It could play in the cat deck. It could play in the life gain deck. It could play in the cleric deck. But even with that much spread, I'm not sure that you're actually going to end up playing the card in any of those decks. But I'm going to play the card because I like making cats. But you know that about me. Moving on, here's Expedition Champion right here. 3 mana, 2 and a red for 2/3 human warrior with a weird sword. And he gets +2/+0 as long as you control another warrior. So 3 mana for a 4/3. It's not great. At least it's a warrior, I guess. But moving on, here's Merfolk Falconer. 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for a 4/4 merfolk that's riding a big old bird. He has flying, of course. And whenever you cast a kick spell, you scry 2. That is a pretty dope limited uncommon right there. It's an air elemental. It's just a 5 mana 4/4 flying with upside, and I'll play that. I will play that every time. Every time. Even if I only have like 1 or 2 spells with kicker in the deck, play the card. Just play it. It's a 5 mana 4/4 flyer. The stats are good and limited. But anyway. Oh boy. Here's Thieving Skydiver, everybody. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 merfolk robe with kicker X. X cannot be 0. Remember that. Flying. When Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, you attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So obviously, Colossus Hammer, hilarious. Note that you don't have to steal a thing. You can already control the equipment. So if you do use it on Colossus Hammer, which is just like the 1 mana, target creature gets +10/+10, or equipped creature gets +10/+10. Yeah, that thing. But it costs like $1 million to equip, I believe. But yeah, if you just have a Skydiver out, you can pay, 1 mana to kick it, pay 3 mana for it, and attach Colossus Hammer to it. It does lose flying, but it's still a pretty cute trick in Historic. But in Standard, we have Shadow Spear, just 1 mana. If your opponent happens to have a Shadow Spear, then this can steal it. And at that point, it's a 3 mana, 3/2 flying lifelink trample, so that's pretty decent. But there's also Embercleave if you want to spend all of the mana in the entire world. But maybe the cheekiest thing you can do with this in the future Standard is steal your opponent's Lucky Clover when they're playing Teamer Adventures. I think that might be cute, 4 mana, 2/1 flyer that steals their Clover and really kneecaps their game plan. And this might actually end up having a lot to do. Maybe if we see some more artifacts, especially in coming sets, this could be fantastic. So I like a good bit about Skydiver, and it even looks good in older formats, like in Legacy, you can pay 3 mana and steal one of their Moxen. That seems okay, right? So I don't hate Skydiver. I think it's actually one of the more interesting and probably, likely to see play cards in the entire set. I'm serious. But moving on, let's look at Disenchant. It's Disenchant. Big story moment in the art, but aside from that, it's Disenchant. So, you know what that does. Let's move on to Spare Supplies. This is just 2 mana for an artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. When it does enter the battlefield, though, you draw a card. You can pay 2, tap it, and sack it to draw a card. So, kind of sucks that you can't play it and then sacrifice it on the same turn to end up drawing 2 cards for 4 mana. Which would be a decent deal, especially considering you can play it in literally any deck. And that's what's kind of what makes me like this artifact. It's a common, so it's pauper playable. I don't know if it's going to see play in that format, but at the very least, this will probably replace Guild Globe in the Doom Foretold decks, because it's an artifact that costs 2 and draws you a card. And if you haven't, gotten your Doom Foretold by turn 3 or 4, then you can always just pay the mana and sack it and try to draw into Doom Foretold. Or Sweeper, if you absolutely have to have a Sweeper by the next turn, try to draw into it. So there's a lot of cool stuff that Spare Supplies can do. And I like this card, kind of an awful lot, to be honest. I love the rarity. I love the simple design. I love the fact that it draws 2 cards and any deck can play it. It's not going to take standard over or anything, but I think it's a really elegant design, and it definitely will see play in, a niche deck here or there. But that's a mark of a decent card. So let's move on to Cunning Geyser Mage. I feel like it's pretty easy to make a slip of the tongue when saying this thing's name in one way or another. But Cunning Geyser Mage is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 3/2 human wizard with kicker, 2 and a blue. When it ETBs, if it was kicked, return up to 1 other target creature to its owner's hand. So you have 3 mana, 3/2 wizard. That's an important creature type in limited. Or you get a 6 mana, 3/2 Mana War. That bounces a creature, which is, I guess, at least sort of fine and sealed. I usually like bodies that bounce. But 6 mana is a lot. 6 mana is a lot. The stats are terrible if you do pay 6 for it. But if you only pay 3 for it, you just get a vanilla 3/2, and that's not very good either. But I do like this kind of versatility. And I think in sealed, slower format, maybe something like this is playable as like a one-of. Or if you just need wizards for your party or something. But up next, it's Iridescent Hornbeetle. This is a bad card, probably, but I want to play with it. It's 4 and a green for a 3/4 insect. At the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each +1/+1 counter you put on creatures under your control this turn. So if you play this on turn 5 or turn 4 after some ramp or something, and then next turn you untap and play like a Stonecoil Serpent for 5 or 6 mana, then suddenly at your end step you get 6 insect creatures. Does it work that way, or is it slightly worded to where Stonecoil Serpent doesn't work because it enters with the counters? Same thing with stuff like Yorvo. Does that work? I think it might. Either way, even if it doesn't, just in like a Conclave Mentor, distribute +1/+1 counters deck, something like this probably won't see play because it's 5 mana. But I'm at the very least going to create budget decks around it, because 5 mana is a ton for this. It really is, but at the same time, I think that it could do some really, really fun, budget, janky stuff. So I want to play with the card. But anyway, let's move on to Intimidator. Kargan Intimidator, y'all. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 3/1 human warrior that you're going to be seeing in your nightmares for the next 2 years. Cowards can't block warriors. They're bringing that back. You pay 1, choose 1 that hasn't been done this turn. Either Kargan Intimidator gets +1/+1 till end of turn, or target creature becomes a coward until end of turn. See how that works? Or target warrior gains trample until end of turn. So just an immaculate mana sink. A 2 mana guy that can get up to 4 power for just 1 mana. Can also keep a creature from blocking for just 1 mana. Like, all the mana sink options are really good and really cheap. If you got nothing else to do with your mana in a given turn, you just drew a brick, right? You drew a land or something that turn. Then you can use all your mana on Intimidator, just use all of those abilities, and suddenly you have a 4 power trampler that keeps a guy from blocking. It seems good. Kargan Intimidator seems like just one of the straight up and down actual best, like, bread and butter mono red aggro cards. Pretty much the best mono red aggro card of the entire set so far. And even if mono red aggro doesn't get anything else, this at the very least replaces Runaway Steam Cannon in the 2-drop slot. You still got Robber of the Rich, so that deck just keeps on trucking, and you can love it or hate it, but I think there's a place for good aggro decks in the format, and Intimidator is definitely going to make the mono red aggro deck pretty decent. Runaway Steam Cannon, it ain't. Your opponent's not going to have turns where they, put a counter on Steamkin, attack, and then after their second main phase, they remove the counters from Steamkin to play a Light Up the Stage, to play a Light Up the Stage, to play a Shock, and then remove the counters from Steamkin again to play an Anax. That's never going to happen again, and that's dope. But Kargan Intimidator, at the very least, is an amazing early game attacker that can get through a lot of damage for you. So I really like this card. But anyway, Seagate Restoration. Oh boy, this is 7 mana, 4 and 3 blue for a sorcery. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand +1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. And then Seagate Reborn is a land that taps for blue. Enters play tapped unless you bolt yourself, and then it can interplay untapped. I love this art. I actually saw this art a while back. Maybe it got leaked, or maybe it was just art they showed off for the set. But I love this art on Seagate Reborn. But anyway, card looks dope. I will say, if you top deck this and you have no other cards in your hand, it's pretty much always bad. And that's one of the good things about the other Mythic lands that we've seen so far, right? The white one, if you have 7 mana, you top deck it, it makes 2 giant angels, makes your team indestructible until, the next turn. The red one, if you top deck that, you can take out a couple of creatures or a planeswalker and a creature if you have enough mana late in the game. So they're really good top decks. They mitigate the problems with drawing a land in the late game. You can't necessarily say the same thing about this. If you top deck this, it's the only card in your hand. It's awful. It's really bad for 7 mana. But if the control deck draws it with 3 or 4 cards in their hand, it's kind of busted. I think that a lot of decks will probably take a turn off to play this card in the relative late game, especially decks that ramp, Euro decks and whatnot, will probably have enough life and be in the correct board state at some point in the game to play this as a refill if they need to, but otherwise you can just play it as a land. It's fine. You can just play it as a land. Control decks probably won't mind playing it tapped as often, so that's important. And I think you'd probably just play 1 copy of this in a control deck and see how that works. Now, at the same time, outside of control, this could go really, really well in the Mono Blue Nyx Lotus deck. If you haven't seen it, it's a deck that both me and CGB, I think, have championed the most here on YouTube. We both really like this deck, and we played it a couple of times on our channels. But it's a sweet little combo deck. You just basically you untap Nyx Lotus over and over. It used to be with Kiora, but you're not going to be able to do that anymore upon rotation. But you can still use Corridor Monitor to untap Nyx Lotus. And you end up playing this huge Gadwick, Gadwick for X equals 12 or something. And then you Thassa's Oracle and win the game off of Oracle. That's how that deck usually works. And I can imagine that after a Gadwick for, X equals 10, draw 10, one of them's a Corridor Monitor that untaps your Nyx Lotus. You can tap your Nyx Lotus again and play this. And this will almost certainly, after a huge Gadwick, draw the Thassa's Oracle if you don't have it, or at least draw enough cards to where Thassa's Oracle will win the game. So I think this is actually a really dope card for a few decks. And again, the opportunity cost is unbelievably low for decks that want to play this. So you'll see it. You'll absolutely see this card. But anyway, let's move on to Murasa Sproutling, is apparently what they're calling this. This is 2 and a green for a 3/3 plant elemental with kicker, 1 and a green. When Murasa Sproutling, I keep wanting to call it Sapling. When Murasa Sproutling enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target card with kicker from your graveyard to your hand. So, I'll say a 3-mana 3/3 looks at least decent in a limited environment. And if you pay 5 mana for it, then it's very likely you're going to get pretty decent card advantage in the late game. Decent top deck too. So there are things I like about the card, but I don't think it's going to end up seeing any standard play. I don't know that the kicker cards only deck looks very good, to be honest. But let's move on, or at least not yet. Let's move on to Murasa Brute, 3 mana for a 3/3. That's whatever. Here's Morog. I think that's right. Morog, Fury of Akoum. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 red for a 6/6 legendary Minotaur warrior, and this card is very good. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it attacked this turn. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So, note that I believe the way this is worded, if you attack first, it doesn't work because your creatures won't untap. I think you have to actually play this on your second main. So that's kind of interesting, and it actually hinders the card a little bit. Unless I'm just wrong, but I'm fairly certain that the way this is worded, the best time to actually play the card, if you don't have a bunch of Vigilance dudes, is your second main phase. So keep that in mind. But I think this goes really well with Perforos, the bronze-blooded, the 5-mana guy that gives all your creatures haste, so it gives Morog haste. And it also allows you to play Morog as a sneak attack, right? You can just pay 3 mana and play Morog out of your hand. In that way, you're going to be getting a bunch of attack steps with your creatures. Morog will have haste, and if you played Perforos on 5 and played a land on 6, it's entirely possible that you're able to play Morog and another creature out of your hand with Perforos and just win the game immediately on 6. So I could see this being really sweet in those decks, and in Historic, I think it could go really well with Rhythm of the Wild. You get Rhythm of the Wild down on turn 3, just give this thing haste by the time you play it. That seems okay to me too. So there's a lot of stuff I really like about this card. And just the Anthem effect for the second and third attack steps or whatever is really dope. And do know you can get multiple attack steps, not just 2, right? Because if you play this and then like Cultivate, or play this and then literally anything, Migration Path or something, you just get a ton of attack steps. And that could be really good. That could be really, really good. So I do like this card kind of a lot. And I think there's a ton of stuff you could do with it. At the very least, it's yet another cool Minotaur for Commander. And by the way, that's something I keep forgetting to mention about these lands, especially the untapped, the ones that can come to play untapped, the flip lands. I think that at the very least, those are going to be one-ofs in most commander decks. So there's that. I should mention that. But anyway, Lithoform Blight is up next. I'm actually really interested in this card, but it looks bad. It says 1 and a black for an aura that enchants a land. When it ETBs, you draw a card, and enchanted land loses all land types and abilities and has tap, add a colorless. And tap, pay 1 life, add a mana of any color. So for 2 mana, you're probably going to play this on one of your lands. Just throwing that out there, unless you play it on one of your opponent's castles. That's a thing you could do. There's a few things you could do with this in terms of your opponent's lands, but I'm kind of interested in just throwing it on one of my lands and drawing a card, and now that land taps for whatever mana. Like that land is just a mana confluence or a City of Brass for the rest of the game. And that seems actually kind of very unbelievably good. So, but at the same time, you know, it's 2 mana for a thing that almost does nothing. It draws a card. If it didn't replace itself, I wouldn't be looking at it at all, but I am a little bit interested in this, especially in the aura-based decks, you know, that want to just hit a bunch of constellation triggers with Archon of Sun's Grace or something, right? I could maybe, possibly, you know, the 2 mana thing that draws you a card and sets up your mana for the rest of the game actually doesn't look terrible to me, but let's move on. It's a Phylath World Sculptor, 6 mana, 4 a red and a green for a 5/5 legendary elemental. When it ETBs, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each basic land you control. It also has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you put 4 +1/+1 counters on target plant you control. Note that this only works off of basic lands. You only get a plant for each basic land that you control. So a lot of times in a serious competitive constructed deck, I doubt that this is going to make, 6 plant tokens when it ETBs, but it probably only needs to make like 2 plant tokens when it ETBs, and it's still worth it, especially if you can cast it for 6 and then play a land. Yeah, you're getting like 9 power worth of stuff on 3 creatures, one of them's a chump blocker, 2 of them are relatively meaty guys, so this does cost an awful lot of mana. But if you can go ahead and like immediately grow one of the tokens somehow, then I think it might be worth it. Even though it's just a pile of stats, it's a board in a box. And even at a relatively steep price, I think that it's at least worth experimenting with. But I'm holding my breath for now. I'm not sure how great it is in Standard, but in Commander, this looks really fun to play around with. But moving on. Oh, wow, we're almost done. Moving on, here's Lull Mage's Familiar. I've seen people compare this card to Courser of Krufix, and is that some kind of joke? Anyway, it's 3 mana, 1 a green and a blue for a 2/4 beast. You can tap it to add green or blue, and whenever you cast a kicked spell, you gain 2 life. So you have to play a bunch of spells with kicker to gain the life. But I guess it's a 3 mana 2/4, which isn't bad stats. Taps for mana, which isn't terrible. Like, I don't hate this card, I really don't, but I think it's more of a limited thing than a constructed thing, but we'll have to end up seeing. I don't hate these stats, but I would have been more impressed by a 3 mana 2/4 stat line like 2 years ago. Nowadays, it's just not as impressive. I like the art, but I'm not sure this card sees Standard play, but it's probably going to be really good in Limited. It ties together a lot of loose ends for you. It's a kicker payoff, a ramp, fixes your mana, decent stats for the body, or stats for the cost. So I really like the card in Limited, but I don't think it goes anywhere after, out of that format. But here's Cinderclasm. I like this card a lot. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant, with kicker red. Cinderclasm deals 1 damage to each creature. If it was kicked, it deals 2 damage to each creature instead. So, like an Electrickery that you can sort of turn into a Flame Sweep. And that's really good. This will replace Flame Sweep in sideboards and in best of 1 decks, too. When Flame Sweep rotates next month, or shoot, this month. And it looks really good in that capacity. And if you're playing against a Tokens deck or Edgewall Innkeeper, and keep in mind that the Adventures decks play not only Edgewall Innkeeper, but Brazen Borrower, Lovestruck Beast makes tokens with its Adventure half that have, 1 toughness. So it's entirely possible Cinderclasm picks off a bunch of stuff against a bunch of different decks without even having to kick it. But, if you kick it, it's still 3 mana at instant speed for, as much damage as you'd kind of come to expect from a red sweeper uncommon, right? So I think this is a very inherently playable card. So I love it. But anyway, let's move on to Dreadworm. We'll get to this other card in a second. Dreadworm is 5 mana, 4 and a black for a 5/4 worm horror with landfall whenever you play a land, basically. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Really sweet for attacking. right? In limited, especially at the common level, it's really not a terrible card, but at the same time, it's kind of just stats, but it's going to be really difficult to kill without, some sort of instant speed removal. So kind of do like it as like a bread and butter, if you need another big creature to fill out your curve. You could probably do a lot worse than Dreadworm, and it's probably going to really create some headaches for people when you swing in with it. But in any case, it's just okay. Like, I'd give it like a solid 1.75 for limited, but it's not like amazing. But moving on, here's Skyclave Loot, which is, wait, where'd you go? Oh, there's a new card. We'll get to it in a second. Skyclave Loot, which is almost certainly not the name of this card for real. But that's the translation for now. It's 4 and a blue for a sorcery. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures that make up your party plus 3. So you're always looking at exactly your at least 3 cards. Add 3 cards from your library to your hand. Shuffle the rest into your library. So that's not bad because it's draw 3. It's a guaranteed draw 3. Although, I mean, it's a 5-mana sorcery, so that's bad. Like, don't get me wrong, it's bad. I'm mostly talking about limited applications here, because in limited, for 5 mana, it's literally always going to draw you 3, no matter what. But if you have extra party members, it just helps you look at more cards. So I bet people are going to probably compare this to Dig Through Time. And it wouldn't surprise me if the original design of this was that it costs less to cast for each member of your party, but I think that got switched because it was probably too close to Dig Through Time with that mechanic. But, no matter what sort of the development cycle looked like, where it ended up is not something I'm super excited about, but you might play one of these in like a sealed control deck or something. But moving on, here's Scale the Heights. They will see us waving from such great heights. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green, 4 sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. You gain 2 life. You may play an additional land this turn and draw a card. Interesting. Okay, well. First of all, the +1/+1 counter says up to, so you don't have to have a creature to actually play this. Your opponent doesn't have to have a creature. That's good. Let's just assume that you don't have a creature. So it's almost Euro if you don't have a creature. Rather than gain 3 life, you gain 2. You draw the card just like Euro, and you can play an additional land just like Euro. So that's that's kind of cute, isn't it? They just put Euro's front half on a card. Nobody for you. Instead, though, you do get to immediately impact the board by putting counters on stuff, which Euro doesn't do. Do I like this card? Is this a fixed growth spiral? Is that what I'm looking at, a fixed growth spiral? That instead of 2, it costs 3, and it's not instant speed? But play an additional land this turn and draw a card is growth spiral, right? But they added a mana to it and gave it sorcery speed to give it 2 more effects. I think I like this. I think I like this card. Is this good? Is this a good card? I think this is a good card. I'm fairly certain that this is decent, even if you only get 3 out of the 4 things. Like, I don't think you have to put a +1/+1 counter on a thing. But if you do, it's especially decent, right? I mean, there are going to be other times where you play it. Like, how good is this as a top deck? Let's look at that. Let's say I draw this on turn 9. Putting a counter on a thing is probably going to happen. Gaining 2 life might matter a little bit. A listenal land this turn won't matter, but drawing a card will. And if it's like super late in the game, you can just basically cycle it and get a couple of extra abilities for 3 mana. I like it. I like this card. I think it's only existed for like 10 seconds. This is a pauper card too. This is common, so it's pauper legal. This is such a cool card. And you can't even say it, like I said a second ago, you can't even say it doesn't affect the battlefield, because that's probably what people who don't like it would say. But it does in some small way affect the battlefield. So it affects the board state. Can't use that excuse. I think I like this card, like, probably too much, but, I don't know. Like, most of Growth Spiral's appeal was that you could play it at instant speed. That was a huge part of that card. But it wasn't the only, it wasn't the best part, right? It wasn't, the best part of Growth Spiral were the actual effects. And there were a lot of times where I cast Growth Spiral on my turn. So maybe this isn't like actually that bad. Like maybe this is a very real card. I want to know, all of your opinions on all the cards we cover every day, but I especially want to know, do I just have like new card brain with this and I've only read it one time and it's only existed for 30 seconds, so I think it might be good? Do I have new card brain, or is this actually good? I think this is actually good. But just let me know how you felt about all the takes down there in the comments section. And we'll do some more spoilers soon. I'll get back into the office. I'll get back on camera. I promise you, I love you all very much. And thanks for putting up with the weird situation this spoiler season. But I'll be back with you soon, and I'll be back streaming on Twitch soon. If you haven't caught me yet, go to twitch.tv /SBMTG Dev. You can see me stream live. Usually I stream on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, but I might stream Saturday. I'll probably end up streaming on Sunday this week, though, so catch me there. And, of course, go to patreon.com/SBMTG if you want to donate $1 to the channel and help vote on what decks we do first in this season. Because this looks like a pretty hype season, y'all. I'm telling you. But anyway, that's all I got for this one. Just let me know how you felt about all the stuff down there in the comments section. We made that specifically so you could tell me how you feel. And, yeah, like the video, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. And I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.